Dr. Richard Shaw's fingers tremble as he guides Faye's delicate vine-like appendages, teaching the young Romulan botanist a technique she never imagined existed. Alarms blare through the sealed laboratory on Viridia Prime, drowning out Faye's gasps of discomfort and newfound pleasure. Toxic spores swirl beyond the containment field, threatening to overwhelm them both. "Trust me," Richard urges, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Your body can produce the antifungal compound we need. You just need to stimulate the right areas." Faye's emerald skin flushes a deeper green. "This feels improper," she whispers, even as her leaf-like hair quivers with each touch. "It's our only chance," Richard insists, guiding her movements with the precision of a surgeon and the gentleness of a lover. The renowned human xenobiologist hadn't expected his first day on the Romulan colony world to involve such an intimate encounter. He'd come to study Viridia Prime's unique flora and assist with the species' reproductive crisis. Now, trapped by a rapidly mutating fungal outbreak, Richard's unconventional knowledge of earth plant biology might be their only hope for survival. As Faye's body responds to his instructions, producing a shimmering sap that neutralizes the encroaching spores, Richard's mind races. The success of this impromptu procedure could be the key to solving the Romulans' larger problem. But he'll have to navigate complex interspecies politics and deep-rooted cultural taboos to implement his theories on a broader scale. The containment field flickers, and Richard redoubles his efforts. "Almost there," he encourages Faye, whose eyes are now wide with a mix of shock and dawning understanding. Beyond the laboratory walls, Romulan scientists scramble to contain the outbreak. They'd requested Earth's help, but never imagined it would come in such an unexpected form. As the last of the toxic spores dissipate, Richard knows he's earned their trust, and likely their scrutiny. Faye slumps against him, exhausted but alive. What was that?" she asks, her voice a mix of awe and lingering embarrassment. Richard helps her to her feet, acutely aware of the softness of her plant-like skin. "That," he says with a smile, "was just the beginning. I think we may have found the solution to more than just this outbreak." As the laboratory doors finally slide open, Richard braces himself for the challenges ahead. He'll have unrestricted access to the Romulan genetic archives now, but using that information to teach an entire species to harness their latent abilities will be no easy task. And then there's Faye. The growing attraction between them could jeopardize everything. But as he looks at the young Romulan botanist, still flushed and trembling from their shared experience, Richard knows he's exactly where he needs to be. Together, they just might save an entire species and discover something profound about themselves in the process. As the laboratory doors slid open, Richard and Faye were met with a flurry of activity. Romulan scientists rushed in, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. Richard helped Faye to a nearby chair, acutely aware of the softness of her plant-like skin and the lingering tremors that coursed through her body. In the days that followed, Richard and Faye's collaboration intensified. They spent long hours in the lab, working to refine and expand upon the techniques that had saved their lives during the fungal outbreak. Richard's hands moved with practiced precision as he guided Faye through exercises designed to enhance her natural defenses and regenerative abilities. "Focus on the flow of nutrients through your vascular system," Richard instructed, his fingers tracing the delicate veins visible beneath Faye's emerald skin. "Now, try to direct that flow to your outer epidermis." Faye's brow furrowed in concentration. Slowly, a shimmering layer of protective sap began to form on her skin. She gasped, her eyes widening in wonder. "I can feel it. It's like a shield growing from within me." Richard nodded approvingly. "Excellent progress, Faye. With practice, you'll be able to produce this protective layer at will." As they worked, Richard couldn't help but notice the growing connection between them. Each touch, each shared discovery, seemed to deepen their bond. He reminded himself to maintain professional distance, but found it increasingly difficult as Faye's eyes lit up with each new revelation about her body's capabilities. Word of their success in containing the fungal threat spread quickly through the Romulan colony. Before long, Richard received an invitation to present his findings to the Romulan High Council. He spent days preparing, poring over data, and refining his arguments. On the day of the presentation, Richard stood before the austere council chamber, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. He took a deep breath and began. Esteemed members of the High Council, I stand before you today with a proposition that could revolutionize Romulan society. The plant-like physiology of your species is not a limitation, but a wellspring of untapped potential. As Richard spoke, he could see the council members' reactions shift. Some leaned forward, intrigued by the possibilities he presented. Others sat back, their faces etched with skepticism and concern. By embracing and developing these abilities, Richard continued, we may not only solve the current reproductive crisis, but also unlock new avenues for Romulan advancement in medicine, agriculture, and even space exploration. Counselor Varen, a stern-faced elder, interrupted. And how do you propose we develop these abilities, Dr. Shaw, through the kind of intimate encounters you shared with young Faye during the fungal outbreak? Richard felt a flush creep up his neck, but maintained his composure. The techniques I've developed are based on scientific principles, Counselor. They can be taught and practiced in a clinical setting. As the debate raged on in the council chamber, Faye found herself confiding in her close friend and fellow botanist, Lyra. They sat in the lush gardens of the Botanical Research Center, surrounded by the vibrant flora of Viridia Prime. I don't know what to think, Lyra, Faye admitted, absently stroking the leaf-like tendrils of her hair. These new sensations, these abilities Dr. Shaw is helping me discover, they're exhilarating, but also terrifying. Lyra leaned in, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. But isn't it exciting? Think about it, Faye. If what you're experiencing could help solve our reproductive issues, it could change everything for our people. Faye nodded slowly, considering her friend's words. You're right. It's just, my feelings for Richard, Dr. Shaw, they're becoming complicated. I'm not sure how to separate the professional from the personal anymore. As Faye grappled with her emotions, Richard made a breakthrough in the genetic archives. Hidden behind a false wall, he discovered a chamber filled with ancient Romulan texts. His translator working overtime, Richard pored over the scrolls, his excitement growing with each passing moment. Faye, look at this, he called out as she entered the archive room. These texts describe reproductive rituals that align perfectly with the techniques we've been exploring. It's as if your ancestors knew about these abilities, but somehow lost that knowledge over time. Faye leaned in, her eyes widening as she scanned the ancient writing. This is incredible, Richard. But why were these texts hidden away? Before Richard could respond, the archive room door slid open with a hiss. Commander Thorne strode in, his face a mask of almost unchecked anger. Dr. Shaw, your research ends now. You are to cease all activities and prepare for immediate departure from Viridia Prime. Richard stood his ground, acutely aware of Faye tensing beside him. Commander Thorne, I understand your concerns, but the work we're doing here is vital to the future of your people. These texts prove that what we're exploring isn't new or foreign to Romulan culture. It's a rediscovery of lost knowledge. Thorne's eyes narrowed. You overstep your bounds, human. Your methods are a corruption of our sacred traditions. I will not allow you to further influence our people with your unorthodox practices. As the tension in the room mounted, Faye felt a strange sensation coursing through her body. A warmth spread from her core, and she gasped as she realized what it meant. For the first time in generations, a Romulan was experiencing the early signs of natural pollination. The realization hit her like a shockwave. She looked from Richard to Commander Thorne, knowing that her next words could change the course of her people's future. As she opened her mouth to speak, alarms began blaring throughout the research center, signaling a development that would force all of them to confront the rapidly changing reality of Romulan society. As Faye opened her mouth to speak, alarms blared throughout the research center, drowning out her words. Richard, Faye, and Commander Thorne exchanged startled glances before rushing out of the archive room. The corridors were filled with frantic activity as scientists and researchers hurried to their stations. Screens lining the walls displayed rapidly changing data, showing unprecedented spikes in atmospheric pollen levels and plant growth rates across Viridia Prime. What's happening? Faye asked, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. Richard's eyes widened as he analyzed the incoming data. It's not just you, Faye. The entire planet is experiencing a surge in reproductive activity. The techniques we've been working on, they're spreading somehow. Commander Thorne's face contorted with a mix of anger and disbelief. This is your doing, Shaw. You've unleashed something you can't control. Before Richard could respond, a group of young Romulan scientists burst into the room, their eyes alight with excitement. Dr. Shaw, Dr. Shaw, one of them called out. It's happening all over the planet. Romulans are reporting new sensations, increased fertility rates. It's just like what you described in your research. Commander Thorne stepped forward, his voice cutting through the excitement. Enough! This ends now. I'm implementing a planet-wide lockdown. All research related to these reproductive rituals is to cease immediately. As if to punctuate his words, the facility's security systems activated, sealing off sections of the building. Richard watched in dismay as armored Romulan guards began confiscating equipment and research materials from nearby laboratories. Faye grabbed Richard's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Richard, we can't let them destroy everything we've worked for. Our people need this knowledge. Richard nodded, his mind racing. You're right, but we need to be careful. Thorne won't hesitate to have us arrested if we resist openly. As the chaos unfolded around them, Richard noticed Dr. Vex, a senior Romulan scientist, watching the scene with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met briefly, and Richard sensed a glimmer of understanding pass between them. Over the next few days, the situation on Viridia Prime rapidly escalated. Richard found himself under house arrest, confined to his quarters with limited access to information about the outside world. Through whispered conversations with sympathetic guards, he learned of the growing unrest among the population. A resistance movement, calling themselves the New Growth, had formed, secretly practicing and spreading the techniques Richard had developed. The once orderly Romulan cities were transforming, with plant life integrating into urban structures in ways never seen before. On the 5th day of his confinement, Richard received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Vex entered his quarters, dismissing the guards with a curt nod. Dr. Shaw, Vex said, his voice low, we don't have much time. I've been monitoring your work, and I believe it's the key to saving our species. I propose a collaboration, in secret, away from Thorne's surveillance. Richard leaned forward, intrigued. You've been conducting your own research? Vex nodded. For years, but your methods have achieved in weeks what I couldn't in decades. We need to continue this work, for the sake of our people. As they began to discuss their plans, Richard's communication device chimed with an urgent message from Lyra. His heart raced as he read the contents. It's Faye, he said, looking up at Vex. Her condition has advanced rapidly. She needs my help. Vex's expression grew serious. This could be the evidence we need to sway public opinion, but getting to her won't be easy with the lockdown in place. Richard stood, willpower etched on his face. I have to try. Faye's transformation could provide crucial data for our research. With Vex's help, Richard made contact with members of the New Growth movement. They devised a plan to smuggle him out of his quarters and across the city to Faye's location. As night fell, Richard found himself creeping through the transformed landscape of the Romulan capital. The once sterile streets were now alive with bioluminescent flora, their soft glow providing cover for his clandestine journey. He marveled at the changes around him, vines intertwined with sleek Romulan architecture, creating a harmonious blend of nature and technology. The air was thick with the sweet scent of newly bloomed flowers, a stark contrast to the artificial atmosphere he had grown accustomed to. As he navigated through a dense thicket that had sprung up in what was once a bustling plaza, Richard heard the sound of approaching footsteps. He ducked behind a large, pulsating fungal growth, holding his breath as a patrol of Romulan guards passed by. Did you see Tella's daughter? One guard whispered to another. They say she started to bloom, just like the fugitive botanist. Quiet, the other guard hissed. We're not supposed to talk about that. Commander Thorne says it's all part of the humans' corrupting influence. As the guards moved on, Richard emerged from his hiding place, more determined than ever to reach Faye. He knew that her transformation held the key to understanding the profound changes sweeping across Viridia Prime. With the help of the new growth network, Richard made his way through the city's transformed underbelly. He passed through hidden gardens where young Romulans practiced the techniques he had taught Faye, their bodies glowing with newfound energy. Finally, after hours of tense travel, Richard arrived at a secluded greenhouse on the outskirts of the city. As he approached, the plants seemed to react to his presence, parting to reveal a hidden entrance. Inside, he found Lyra waiting for him, her face a mix of relief and concern. "Thank the stars you made it, Dr. Shaw. Faye's this way. But prepare yourself. She's changed in ways we never imagined." Lyra led Richard deeper into the greenhouse, through a maze of vibrant, pulsating plant life. As they rounded a corner, Richard stopped in his tracks, awestruck by the sight before him. In the center of a clearing stood Faye, but she was barely recognizable. Her body had transformed into a stunning hybrid of Romulan and plant, with vibrant, flower-like structures blooming from her skin. She emanated a soft, ethereal glow, and the air around her was thick with a sweet, intoxicating aroma. "Richard," Faye said, her voice carrying a new melodic quality, "you came." As Richard stepped forward, he knew that the next few moments would be crucial, not just for Faye, but for the future of the entire Romulan species. The challenge that lay ahead was immense, but in Faye's transformed visage, he saw the potential for a new era of Romulan evolution, one that could bridge the gap between their people and the natural world they had long sought to control. Control. As Richard stepped closer to Faye, he was overwhelmed by the profound transformation before him. Her once humanoid form had given way to a breathtaking fusion of Romulan and plant life. Vibrant, flower-like structures blossomed across her skin, each petal shimmering with an otherworldly iridescence. "Faye," Richard breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. I've never seen anything like this." Faye's eyes, now a deep emerald green, locked onto Richard's. "It's happening so fast, Richard. I can feel everything. The plants, the soil, even the air around us. It's beautiful, but I'm scared. I can't control it." As she spoke, a wave of sweet-scented pollen billowed from her body. Richard watched in amazement as the surrounding plant life responded instantly, growing and thriving at an accelerated rate. Vines crept up the walls, leaves unfurled, and flowers burst into bloom. Lyra coughed, covering her mouth and nose. "The pollen! It's affecting everything." Richard's mind raced, years of botanical knowledge merging with the revelations from the ancient Romulan texts. "We need to stabilize her condition," he said, turning to the members of the new growth movement who had escorted him. "Do you have any equipment I can use?" A young Romulan woman stepped forward, her own skin showing the early signs of transformation. "We've gathered some basic medical and botanical tools, Dr. Shaw. They're not much, but it's all we could salvage without alerting the authorities." Richard nodded gratefully, quickly assessing the makeshift equipment. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. He began his examination of Faye, marveling at the complexity of her new biology. As he worked, Richard discovered that Faye's body was now a veritable factory of beneficial compounds. "Faye, your system is producing substances I've never seen before. Some of these could revolutionize medicine, maybe even solve food shortages on Viridia Prime." Faye's expression was a mix of wonder and discomfort. "That's incredible. But Richard, it hurts. My body feels like it's on fire, like it's trying to grow in 1,000 directions at once." Richard's heart ached at her pain. He knew he had to act quickly to help her regain control. Drawing on his knowledge of Earth botany and the ancient Romulan texts, he formulated a treatment plan. "Faye, I think I know how to help you stabilize," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "But it's going to require some intimate contact. I need to stimulate specific areas of your new botanical features to regulate your pollen production and nutrient flow. Do you trust me?" Faye nodded without hesitation. "Completely." Richard took a deep breath and began the delicate process. His hands moved carefully over Faye's transformed body, fingers gently probing the junction between flesh and flora. He could feel the energy pulsing beneath her skin, the raw power of nature flowing through her veins. As he worked, Richard found himself hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. Despite the clinical nature of his actions, he couldn't deny the deepening emotional connection he felt with Faye. Her gasps and sighs as he manipulated her new biology sent shivers down his spine. Hours passed as Richard fine-tuned Faye's system. Gradually, her pollen production stabilized, and the rapid growth of the surrounding plant life slowed to a manageable pace. Faye's expression relaxed, the pain giving way to a look of serene wonder. "I can feel it," she whispered. "It's like I'm part of everything around us. The plants, the air, the very soil beneath our feet. And I can control it now, Richard. I can shape it, nurture it." To demonstrate, Faye extended her hand. A nearby vine responded to her silent command, growing and twisting into an intricate pattern before their eyes. The assembled members of the new growth movement gasped in awe. Lyra, who had been monitoring communications, suddenly tensed. "Dr. Shaw, we have a problem. Word of Faye's condition is spreading through the resistance network. More Romulans are starting to exhibit similar changes. And Commander Thorne knows you've escaped. He's sending forces to apprehend you both." Richard's mind raced, weighing their options. He knew that what was happening here could change the course of Romulan history, perhaps even galactic history. They couldn't let Thorne stop them now. "We need to protect Faye and continue our work," Richard declared. "The key to your species' survival might lie in understanding and controlling these transformations." As if in response to his words, the ground beneath their feet trembled. Outside the greenhouse, they could hear the sound of rapid growth, trees sprouting, vines spreading, flowers blooming en masse. The planet itself seemed to be awakening, responding to the changes in its inhabitants. Richard turned to Faye, his eyes shining with drive and a hint of fear. "Faye, I think it's time we showed the world what you can do. Are you ready?" Faye stood tall, her new form radiating power and grace. "I'm ready, Richard. Let's change the world." As they prepared to face the approaching storm, Richard couldn't help but marvel at the journey that had brought them to this point. What had started as a simple research project had blossomed into something far greater, a botanical revolution that would reshape Romulan society forever. The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the night, signaling the arrival of Thorne's forces. Richard and Faye exchanged a look of silent understanding. Whatever came next, they would face it together, human and Romulan, science and nature, united in the pursuit of a new future for Viridia Prime. The ground shook beneath their feet as the planet itself seemed to respond to the changes sweeping through its inhabitants. Suddenly, the relative calm of the greenhouse was shattered by the sound of approaching vehicles. The harsh glare of searchlights pierced through the lush foliage, illuminating the faces of the resistance members gathered around Faye and Richard. "Thorne's forces," Lyra hissed, her eyes wide with fear. "They've found us." Richard's heart raced as he realized the gravity of their situation. They had come too far to be stopped now. He turned to Faye, her transformed body glowing softly in the dim light. "We need to broadcast your pollen-based message across Viridia Prime. It's our only chance to show everyone what's really happening." Faye nodded, persistence etched on her features. "I'm ready." But before they could put their plan into action, the greenhouse doors burst open. Armored Romulan soldiers poured in, their weapons trained on the group. In the chaos that ensued, Richard found himself separated from Faye. "Richard!" Faye cried out, reaching for him as the crowd surged between them. Panic gripped Richard as he saw Faye disappear from view, but his fear for her safety was quickly replaced by awe as he witnessed her newfound abilities in action. Faye's body began to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Vines erupted from the ground around her, growing at an impossible rate. They twisted and intertwined, forming a dense protective barrier around Faye and the nearby resistance members. Flowers bloomed instantaneously, releasing clouds of glowing pollen that filled the air. The Romulan soldiers hesitated, their weapons lowering slightly as they stared in disbelief at the display of power before them. Some took involuntary steps back, unsure of how to proceed against such unprecedented abilities. Richard's moment of relief was short-lived. Strong hands grabbed him from behind, and he found himself being dragged away by Thorn's forces. He struggled against their grip, catching one last glimpse of Faye's glowing form through the gaps in the living barrier she had created. As Richard was led out of the greenhouse, he saw a familiar face approaching through the chaos. Dr. Vex strode towards them, flanked by a team of Romulan scientists. Their expressions were a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Commander Thorn," Vex called out, his voice carrying over the commotion. "We need to talk. Now." Thorn emerged from the ranks of his soldiers, his face twisted in a scowl. "This better be important, Vex. We're in the middle of an operation." Vex held up a datapad, his eyes gleaming with intensity. "I have evidence that changes everything. The transformations occurring across the planet, they're not just beneficial. They may be essential for our species' survival." Thorn's eyes narrowed, but he motioned for Vex to continue. As the scientist began presenting his findings, Richard noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The sounds of conflict died down, replaced by an uneasy quiet. Taking advantage of the lull, Faye emerged from her protective cocoon of plants. Her transformed body seemed to pulse with energy as she stepped forward, drawing all eyes to her. Without a word, Faye raised her hands. The air around her shimmered, and before the astonished onlookers, plants began to grow at an astonishing rate. Vines climbed invisible trellises, forming intricate functional structures. Trees sprouted from bare earth, their branches heavy with ripe fruit. In a matter of minutes, Faye had created a lush, productive garden where there had only been barren soil. Gasps of wonder echoed through the crowd. Romulan soldiers lowered their weapons, their faces a mix of awe and confusion. Civilians who had gathered to watch the commotion pressed forward, reaching out to touch the miraculous new growth. "This is what we can become," Faye said, her voice carrying a new, harmonious quality that seemed to resonate with the plants around her. "This is the future of Viridia Prime." As if on cue, a new group arrived on the scene. Senator Alara, accompanied by a delegation from the Romulan High Council, approached the gathering. Her eyes widened as she took in the transformed landscape and Faye's altered form. "By the ancestors," Alara breathed, Is this real?" Richard, still held by Thorn's soldiers, spoke up. "It's very real, Senator, and it's just the beginning of what's possible." Ilara's gaze swept from Richard to Faye, then to the abundance of food growing around them. Her expression hardened into one of tenacity. "Commander Thorn, stand down your forces. We need to reconsider our approach to this situation." Thorn hesitated, his jaw clenching, but after a moment he gave a curt nod. "Stand down," he ordered his troops. As the soldiers lowered their weapons, Richard felt the hands holding him loosen their grip. He immediately moved towards Faye, their eyes locking as he approached. "You did it," he said softly as he reached her side. Faye smiled, her transformed features radiating with an inner light. "We did it," she corrected him, taking his hand in her own. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Senator Ilara's voice. "Dr. Shaw, Faye," she said, her tone urgent. "We need to convene an emergency council meeting immediately." As they were ushered towards the waiting transport, Richard and Faye exchanged a look. They both knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for them, but for the entire Romulan species. The challenges ahead were immense, but as Richard felt the warm pulse of Faye's transformed hand in his, he knew they were ready to face whatever came next. The transport doors closed behind them, and they lifted off towards the Romulan capital, leaving behind a landscape forever changed, a vivid symbol of the transformation that was about to sweep across Viridia Prime. Prime, leaving behind a landscape forever changed, a vivid symbol of the transformation that was about to sweep across Viridia Prime. As the transport soared towards the Romulan capital, Richard gazed out the window at the rapidly changing landscape below. Patches of vibrant green vegetation sprouted amidst the once barren terrain, a testament to the profound changes taking root across the planet. In the days that followed, the Emergency Council meeting set in motion a series of events that would reshape Romulan society. The establishment of a new research institute, co-led by Richard and Dr. Vex, became the epicenter of the botanical revolution sweeping across Viridia Prime. The Institute's sprawling complex bustled with activity as Romulans from all walks of life sought guidance on controlling their newfound abilities. Richard found himself working tirelessly, his expertise in xenobiology proving invaluable as he developed tailored programs for individuals grappling with their transformations. One morning, as Richard entered the Institute's main laboratory, he was greeted by a familiar face. Faye stood at the center of a group of transformed Romulans, her body glowing softly as she demonstrated advanced plant manipulation techniques. "Now focus on the energy flowing through your body," Faye instructed, her voice carrying a harmonious quality that seemed to resonate with the plants around her. "Visualize the growth you want to see and let it manifest through your connection to the flora." As if responding to her words, the vines surrounding the group began to twist and intertwine, forming intricate patterns in the air. The assembled Romulans gasped in wonder, their own bodies pulsing with newfound energy as they attempted to replicate Faye's actions. Richard approached the group, a smile playing on his lips. "Impressive as always, Faye," he said, his eyes meeting hers. Faye's face lit up at his presence. "Richard, I was hoping you'd join us. We're making great progress with the advanced manipulation techniques." As the group dispersed for a break, Richard and Faye found a moment alone. "How are you feeling?" Richard asked, his voice low with concern. "Any new developments we should be aware of?" Faye's expression turned thoughtful. "Actually, yes, I've been experiencing something new. It's like I can hear the plants whispering to me, even when I'm not actively trying to communicate with them." Richard's scientific curiosity piqued. "Fascinating. We should run some tests to understand the extent of this new ability. It could have significant implications for our research." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Zara, Commander Thorne's protege assigned to oversee the transformation program. The young Romulan officer approached with a mix of caution and curiosity etched on her face. "Dr. Shaw, Faye," Zara greeted them formally. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I've been tasked with observing today's session and reporting back to the monitoring committee." Richard nodded, maintaining a professional demeanor. "Of course, Lieutenant. We're always happy to demonstrate our progress. Perhaps you'd like to join us for the next phase of training?" As they made their way to the outdoor training grounds, Richard couldn't help but notice the way Zara's eyes widened at the sight of the lush vegetation that now covered the once barren landscape. Massive trees towered overhead, their branches heavy with fruit, while colorful flowers bloomed in every direction. "This is incredible," Zara breathed, her initial skepticism giving way to awe. "I've never seen anything like it." Faye smiled, extending her hand towards a nearby vine. The plant responded instantly, growing and twisting to form a natural archway. "This is just the beginning, Lieutenant. With proper training, every transformed Romulan can learn to harness these abilities." As the day progressed, Richard found himself dividing his attention between guiding the transformed Romulans and keeping a watchful eye on the rapidly changing ecosystem. New plant species seemed to emerge almost hourly, their vibrant colors and unusual growth patterns both fascinating and concerning. "Dr. Vex," Richard called out to his colleague, who was examining a particularly unusual specimen. "We need to set up a dedicated team to catalog and study these new hybrid species. Some of them could have unforeseen effects on the planet's ecology." Vex nodded, his eyes gleaming with scientific excitement. "Agreed. I'll assemble a team immediately. The rate of mutation we're seeing is unprecedented. It's as if the entire planet is evolving alongside our people." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the transformed landscape, Richard found a moment of quiet reflection. He watched as Faye led a group of transformed Romulans through a series of advanced exercises, her movements graceful and assured. A mix of emotions washed over him, pride in the progress they had made, concern for the challenges that lay ahead, and a deepening affection for Faye that both thrilled and frightened him. As if sensing his gaze, Faye looked up, meeting his eyes with a warm smile that sent a jolt of electricity through his body. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching footsteps. Richard turned to see Senator Ilara striding towards him, her face set in a serious expression. "Dr. Shaw," she said, her voice low and urgent, "we've received word from the capital. A delegation from Earth has just arrived on Viridia Prime. They're requesting an immediate meeting with you and Faye. Richard's heart raced as he processed this new development. The arrival of an Earth delegation would undoubtedly complicate their already delicate situation. As he prepared to break the news to Faye, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of an even greater transformation, one that would reshape not just Romulan society, but potentially the entire galactic order. Community. As Richard pondered the implications of this unexpected development, he felt a surge of willpower. They had come too far to let this opportunity slip away. "Thank you, Senator," Richard said, his mind already racing with possibilities. "We'll be ready for the meeting. This could be our chance to showcase the progress we've made here on Viridia Prime." As Ilara nodded and turned to leave, Richard made his way to Faye, who was just concluding her training session. The transformed Romulans dispersed, their faces glowing with a mixture of excitement and newfound confidence. "Faye," Richard called out as he approached, "we need to talk. There's been a new development." Faye's expression shifted from contentment to concern as she took in Richard's serious demeanor. "What is it?" Richard quickly briefed her on the arrival of the Earth delegation. As he spoke, he couldn't help but notice how the surrounding plants seemed to lean in, as if listening to their conversation. It was a stark reminder of the profound changes that had taken root on Viridia Prime. "This could complicate things," Faye said, her brow furrowing. "How much should we reveal about the transformation process?" Before Richard could respond, Lieutenant Zara approached them, her datapad in hand. "Dr. Shaw, Faye," she said, her tone professional but tinged with curiosity. "I've compiled the latest data on crop yields from the experimental fields. The results are impressive." Richard's eyes lit up as he scanned the figures on Zara's datapad. "This is remarkable," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "The Unity Gardens project is exceeding all expectations." Faye leaned in to look at the data, her hand brushing against Richard's as she did so. The brief contact sent a jolt of electricity through him, a reminder of the connection they shared amidst the whirlwind of their work. "We should incorporate these results into our presentation for the Earth delegation," Faye suggested. "It could help alleviate any concerns they might have about the transformation program." Richard nodded in agreement. "Good idea. Zara, could you work on compiling a comprehensive report? Focus on the increased crop yields and the successful integration of transformed and untransformed Romulans working together." Zara nodded, her eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and drive. "Of course, Dr. Shaw. I'll have it ready by morning." As Zara hurried off to complete her task, Richard and Faye made their way towards the main research facility. The path was lined with a vibrant array of new plant species, their colors and forms unlike anything Richard had ever seen in his years of xenobotanical study. "It's beautiful," Faye murmured, her fingers lightly brushing against a large, iridescent leaf. The plant seemed to shiver in response, its colors shifting subtly. Richard watched her interaction with the flora, marveling at the ease with which she communicated with the transformed plant life. "Faye," he said softly, "I've been meaning to ask. How are you coping with all of this? The changes, the responsibilities?" Faye turned to face him, her eyes shimmering with an inner light that still took his breath away. "It's overwhelming at times," she admitted, "but it also feels right, like this is what I was always meant to become." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the edge of the gardens. A group of Romulan scientists were gathered around a newly emerged plant species, their voices raised in a mix of excitement and concern. Richard and Faye hurried over to investigate. As they approached, Richard's eyes widened in surprise. The plant in question was unlike anything he had seen before. A large, carnivorous-looking specimen with vibrant red and purple hues. "What's going on here?" Richard asked, pushing his way through the group of scientists. Dr. Vex turned to him, his face pale. "We've detected similar growths in the wilderness areas surrounding Unity Gardens," he explained. "They seem to be spreading rapidly, and there are reports of attacks on local wildlife." Faye stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the alien plant. As she approached, the plant's movements became more agitated, its leaf-like appendages quivering. "I can sense its hunger," Faye said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just carnivorous, it's aggressive." Richard's mind raced with the implications. "We need to contain this," he said firmly. "Faye, do you think you can communicate with it? Maybe redirect its growth patterns?" Faye nodded, her expression determined. "I can try, but we'll need to act fast. If these plants are spreading as quickly as Dr. Vex suggests, we could have a serious problem on our hands." As they began to formulate a plan to deal with the new threat, Richard couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. The challenges they faced were daunting, but they also represented opportunities to further explore the potential of the Romulan transformation. With the Earth delegation's arrival looming and this new botanical menace threatening their progress, Richard knew that the coming days would be crucial. As he looked at Faye, her body glowing softly with transformative energy, he felt a surge of confidence. Together, they had already achieved the impossible. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was certain they could face them. The carnivorous plant suddenly lashed out, its vine-like tendrils whipping through the air. Richard instinctively pulled Faye back, shielding her with his body. But Faye was already in motion, her hands raised as she focused her newfound abilities on the aggressive flora. The air around them seemed to vibrate with unseen energy as Faye communicated with the plant. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the carnivorous specimen began to retract its tendrils, its aggressive posture relaxing. "Incredible," Dr. Vex breathed, his scientific curiosity overcoming his initial fear. "Faye, how did you do that?" Faye's brow was furrowed in concentration. "It's difficult to explain. I can sense its desires, its drive to grow and consume. I'm trying to redirect that energy to show it a different path." As they watched, the plant began to change before their eyes. Its vibrant red and purple hues softened, and new growths emerged that looked less predatory and more symbiotic. Richard's mind was already racing with the potential applications of this ability. "If we can replicate this on a larger scale," he mused, "we might be able to contain the spread of these carnivorous species and even integrate them into our ecosystem in a beneficial way." Faye nodded, a small smile playing on her lips, despite the strain evident on her face. "It's possible, but it will take time and a lot of effort. We'll need to train more transformed Romulans in these techniques." As the immediate crisis subsided, Richard became acutely aware of the gathering crowd of scientists and transformed Romulans. Their faces were a mix of awe, curiosity, and in some cases, lingering fear. "All right, everyone," Richard called out, taking charge of the situation. "I want a full analysis of this plant species. Dr. Vex, coordinate with the survey teams to map out the extent of its spread. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we can effectively contain it." As the group dispersed to carry out their tasks, Richard turned back to Faye. She looked drained but exhilarated, her eyes bright with the thrill of discovery and accomplishment. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Faye nodded, leaning into his touch. "I'm fine, just processing. Every time I use these abilities, I feel like I'm unlocking new aspects of myself." Their moment of connection was interrupted by the arrival of Senator Ilara, her face grave as she approached. "Dr. Shaw, Faye," she said urgently, "the Earth delegation has requested to move up our meeting. They want to see Unity Gardens for themselves, immediately." Richard and Faye exchanged a look, both aware of the enormity of the moment. The success of their project, the future of Romulan-Earth relations, and perhaps the very course of galactic botanical research hung in the balance. "We're ready," Richard said firmly, squeezing Faye's hand. "Let's show them what we've accomplished here." As they made their way towards the main entrance of Unity Gardens, where the Earth delegation would soon arrive, Richard's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and strategies. He knew that the next few hours would be crucial, not just for their project, but for the future of Viridia Prime itself. The sight of a sleek Earth transport ship descending from the sky brought a mix of anticipation and anxiety. As the ship touched down and its doors began to open, Richard took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was to come. "Whatever happens," Faye whispered beside him, "we're in this together." Richard nodded, drawing strength from her presence. As the first members of the Earth delegation emerged from the ship, he stepped forward, ready to present their groundbreaking work to the wider galactic community. As the Earth delegation emerged from their ship, Richard and Faye stood tall, ready to showcase the groundbreaking work they had accomplished on Viridia Prime. The delegation, led by a stern-faced admiral and flanked by a team of scientists, approached with measured steps. "Dr. Shaw, Faye," the admiral greeted them, his voice carrying a hint of wariness. "We've heard remarkable things about your work here. I trust you're prepared to provide a full demonstration?" Richard nodded, maintaining his composure. "Of course, Admiral. We've prepared a comprehensive tour of Unity Gardens and our research facilities. If you'll follow us, we can begin immediately." As they led the delegation through the vibrant paths of Unity Gardens, Richard and Faye took turns explaining the various aspects of their work. The Earth scientists' eyes widened as they witnessed the unprecedented growth rates and the symbiotic relationship between the transformed Romulans and the plant life. "This is extraordinary," one of the Earth botanists murmured, running her hand along a large, iridescent leaf that seemed to pulse with life. The tour concluded at the main research facility, where Richard and Faye presented their findings on the transformation process and its impact on Romulan society. The Earth delegation listened intently, their expressions a mix of fascination and concern. As the presentation drew to a close, the Admiral cleared his throat. "Dr. Shaw, while your results are undeniably impressive, I must express some reservations about the wider implications of this technology, the potential for misuse." Before the Admiral could finish, an urgent message came through on the facility's communication system. "Dr. Shaw, Faye," Lieutenant Zara's voice crackled over the speakers. "We've just received an invitation to present at the Galactic Scientific Conference on Station Zeta 9. It's scheduled to begin in 3 days." The room fell silent as the implications of this news sank in. Richard and Faye exchanged a look of surprise and excitement. The Galactic Scientific Conference was the most prestigious gathering of scientific minds in the known universe. It was an unprecedented opportunity to share their work with a wider audience. "I suppose this changes things," the Admiral said, his tone measured. "It seems the eyes of the galaxy will be on your project sooner than anticipated." Richard nodded, his mind already racing with preparations. "Indeed, Admiral. This conference could be a turning point for interspecies cooperation and scientific advancement." As the Earth delegation departed to discuss this new development among themselves, Richard turned to Faye. "We need to prepare. This conference will be unlike anything we've faced before." Faye's eyes gleamed with willpower. "We're ready, Richard. It's time to show the galaxy what we've achieved here." The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Richard and Faye worked tirelessly to compile their research, prepare demonstrations, and anticipate potential questions or concerns from the diverse array of species that would be present at the conference. On the morning of their departure, Richard stood at the landing pad, watching as their transport ship descended from the sky. Faye joined him, her presence a calming influence amidst the nervous energy that permeated the air. "No matter what happens at this conference," Richard said softly, "we've already achieved something remarkable here on Viridia Prime." Faye smiled, her hand finding his. "And we're just getting started." As they boarded the ship, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of something monumental. The Galactic Scientific Conference would be a test unlike any they had faced before, but he was confident in their work and in the partnership he had forged with Faye. The journey to Station Zeta 9 passed quickly, filled with last-minute preparations and discussions. As their ship docked at the massive space station orbiting a swirling gas giant, Richard and Faye steeled themselves for what lay ahead. Stepping onto the station, they were immediately struck by the diversity of life forms surrounding them. Delegates from countless worlds filled the corridors, their appearance ranging from familiar humanoid forms to utterly alien configurations. A station official greeted them, guiding them towards the main conference hall. "Dr. Shaw, Faye, your presentation is scheduled for this afternoon. There's been quite a buzz about your work." As they entered the bustling conference hall, all eyes seemed to turn towards them. Whispers rippled through the crowd, a mix of curiosity and skepticism palpable in the air. Richard squeezed Faye's hand, drawing strength from her presence. "Ready?" he asked. Faye nodded, her eyes scanning the room. Ready. They made their way to the presentation area, setting up their equipment and holograms. As the time for their talk approached, the hall filled to capacity, with beings of all shapes and sizes crowding in to witness the controversial Romulan transformation project firsthand. Taking a deep breath, Richard stepped up to the podium, Faye at his side. The murmur of the crowd died down as he began to speak. Esteemed colleagues, Richard's voice rang out clear and confident, we stand before you today to present a breakthrough that we believe will reshape our understanding of biology, ecology, and the very nature of sentient life itself. As Richard launched into their presentation, holographic displays sprang to life around them, showcasing the remarkable achievements of Unity Gardens. The audience watched in rapt attention as Faye demonstrated her abilities, communicating with plant life in ways that defied conventional understanding. Unbeknownst to Richard and Faye, their words and demonstrations were sowing seeds of both wonder and worry among the assembled delegates. As they concluded their presentation, they had no idea of the complex web of consequences their work was about to unleash upon the galactic community. As Richard and Faye concluded their presentation, a wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. The holographic displays faded, leaving the hall in a state of stunned silence. Suddenly, Faye stumbled, her hand flying to her head. Richard caught her arm, steadying her. Faye, what's wrong? Before she could answer, a commotion erupted near the back of the hall. A Tellarite ambassador had collapsed, his body convulsing. Nearby, a Vulcan diplomat clutched her chest, her skin taking on an alarming greenish tint. Medical emergency, shouted a conference organizer, her voice cutting through the growing panic. Richard's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. Faye, your pollen... Faye nodded, her face pale. I couldn't control it. The excitement, the stress, it just happened. As medical teams rushed to assist the affected delegates, Commander Thorne pushed through the crowd, his expression grim. Dr. Shaw, we need to establish a quarantine immediately. This situation is escalating rapidly. Within hours, the conference hall had been transformed into a makeshift quarantine zone. Richard and Faye worked tirelessly, analyzing data and examining the affected delegates. The Tellarite ambassador had sprouted tendrils capable of absorbing nutrients from the air, while the Vulcan diplomat's skin had developed chlorophyll, allowing her to photosynthesize. This is unprecedented, Richard muttered, studying a holographic display of the Vulcan's cellular structure. The pollen seems to have activated dormant plant-like genes in their DNA. A commotion at the entrance to the quarantine zone drew their attention. A group of unusual-looking beings were arguing with the security team. Let us through, insisted a tall, green-skinned individual with leaf-like appendages. We are the Chlorophyllian medical team, led by Dr. Chlora. Our expertise in plant-based biology is crucial in this situation. Richard hesitated, then nodded to the security team. Let them in. We need all the help we can get. As Dr. Chlora and her team integrated into the research efforts, the situation on the station grew more complex. Senator Ilara arrived, her face etched with concern. The diplomatic situation is deteriorating, she reported. Some species are demanding immediate evacuation, while others insist on staying to study the effects. We're doing our best to manage communications with their home worlds, but tensions are high. Richard ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his voice. We need more time. These mutations are unlike anything we've seen before. The implications for our understanding of galactic evolution are staggering. As if to underscore his point, a nearby Andorian suddenly sprouted bioluminescent patches across his skin, casting a soft blue glow around him. Dr. Elena Martinez approached, her eyes gleaming with terrifying excitement. Dr. Shaw, the genetic samples I've collected are showing fascinating patterns. If we could just... Elena, Richard cut her off, his tone sharp. We need to focus on stabilizing these individuals, not advancing your research agenda. The ethical implications alone... Their argument was interrupted by a cry from Faye. She was on her knees, hands pressed to her temples. The voices, she gasped. There are so many. I can feel them all. Richard rushed to her side, watching in horror as new, unknown flora began to sprout from her skin. Around them, the quarantine zone was rapidly transforming. Plants were growing at an alarming rate, vines snaking across the floors and walls. "We need to do something," Commander Thorne urged, eyeing the encroaching vegetation warily. "At this rate, the plant growth will overwhelm the station's life support systems." Richard's mind raced, considering their options. He thought back to their work on Viridia Prime, to the transformation process they had developed for the Romulans. It was risky, untested on other species, but it might be their only chance. "I have an idea," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We can use a modified version of the Romulan transformation process. It could stabilize the mutations, bring them under conscious control." Dr. Clora's leaf-like appendages rustled with interest. "An intriguing proposal, Dr. Shaw, but the risks are significant, I know," Richard finished, "but we're running out of options." As they debated the merits of the plan, a message came through on the station's communication system. It was from the Romulan High Council. "Dr. Shaw, Faye," the stern voice of a council member filled the room. "You are ordered to return to Viridia Prime immediately. The situation on Station Zeta-9 has become too volatile. We cannot risk further involvement." Richard and Faye exchanged a look of disbelief. Around them, the transformed delegates watched with a mixture of fear and hope in their eyes. The psychic link between them had grown stronger, creating a palpable sense of unity and shared purpose. "We can't abandon them," Faye said, her voice weak but determined. Richard nodded, his eyes sharp. He knew that defying the High Council could have severe consequences, but the fate of these individuals, and potentially the future of interspecies relations, hung in the balance. "We stay," he said firmly. "We'll find a way to stabilize these mutations, with or without the Council's approval." As Richard began outlining his plan to the assembled team, the plants continued their relentless growth. Time was running out, and the decision they made now would shape not only their future, but potentially the course of galactic history itself. Richard's eyes met Faye's, a silent understanding passing between them. The weight of their decision hung heavy in the air, but they knew there was no turning back. "We stay," Richard repeated, his voice steady, "and we act now." With a nod to Commander Thorne, Richard turned to address the assembled team. "We're going to modify the Romulan transformation process. It's our best shot at stabilizing these mutations." Dr. Clora's leaf-like appendages rustled with approval. "An excellent suggestion, Dr. Shaw. My team and I are at your disposal." Dr. Elena Martinez, setting aside her earlier disagreement, stepped forward. "Count me in, Richard. My expertise in xenobiology could prove crucial." As the team began their work, the quarantine zone transformed around them. Vines snaked across control panels, and exotic flowers bloomed in impossible colors. The air grew thick with the scent of alien flora. Commander Thorne pulled Senator Alara aside, his voice low but urgent. "Senator, we need to act quickly. This could be our chance to position the Romulans as leaders in a new era of interspecies cooperation." Ilara's antenna twitched thoughtfully. "You're right, Commander. I'll start reaching out to the other delegates. We need to build support for this endeavor." As Thorne and Alara began their diplomatic maneuvers, Richard and Faye worked tirelessly with their makeshift team. Hours blurred together as they pored over genetic data, tweaked formulas, and ran simulations. Suddenly, Faye gasped, her eyes widening. "Richard, the psychic link, it's intensifying!" Around them, the affected delegates began to sway in unison, their eyes glazed over. Richard realized with a jolt that their individual consciousnesses were merging into a collective mind. "We need to act fast," Richard said, his fingers flying over a holographic interface. "If we don't stabilize them soon, we could lose their individual identities entirely." Working at breakneck speed, they modified their stabilization procedure to include safeguards for individual consciousness. As the final adjustments were made, Richard looked at Faye, his expression grim. "Ready?" he asked. Faye nodded, her face set with drive. "Let's do this." They began administering the treatment to each affected delegate, moving from one to the next with practiced efficiency. As they worked, the rapid plant growth began to slow, and the delegates started to regain control over their new abilities. But it wasn't smooth sailing. A Tellarite ambassador convulsed violently as the stabilization compound was administered, his body rejecting the treatment. "His physiology is rejecting the compound," Dr. Martinez shouted, her hands moving swiftly over her medical scanner. "We need to adjust the formula." Richard and Faye quickly recalibrated the treatment, drawing on their combined expertise to tailor it to the Tellarite's unique biology. After tense moments, the ambassador's condition stabilized, his newly grown tendrils relaxing. As word of their efforts spread, the space around Station Zeta-9 became crowded with ships from various worlds. Some offered assistance, while others demanded access to the new technology. Commander Thorne's voice crackled over the comm system. "Dr. Shaw, we're managing the situation out here, but tensions are high. How much longer?" "We're making progress," Richard replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "But we're not out of the woods yet." As they worked their way through the affected delegates, they finally reached Faye. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he prepared the treatment for her. "Your case is unique, Faye," he said softly. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Faye's eyes met his, filled with trust and grit. "I am. We've come too far to stop now." As Richard administered the treatment, Faye's body arched, her skin glowing with an otherworldly light. A final burst of pollen exploded from her, filling the air with shimmering particles. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then before their eyes, the rampant plant growth throughout the station began to change. Vines intertwined with circuitry, leaves merged with air filtration systems. The chaotic growth was transforming into a harmonious, symbiotic relationship with the station's technology. As the stabilization process concluded, the affected delegates began to stir, their eyes clearing as they regained control of their bodies and minds. The psychic link between them remained, but at a manageable level, allowing for enhanced communication without loss of individuality. Richard helped Faye to her feet, both of them gazing in wonder at the transformed environment around them. The quarantine zone now resembled a lush alien garden, teeming with life yet perfectly integrated with the station's systems. Commander Thorne's voice came over the comm once more, filled with a mix of awe and excitement. "Dr. Shaw, Senator Ilara has successfully negotiated with representatives from a dozen worlds. They're eager to discuss the implications of what's happened here." As the quarantine was cautiously lifted, Richard and Faye found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of diplomatic activity. Representatives from across the galaxy poured into the station, all clamoring to understand and potentially benefit from the incredible events that had unfolded. Amidst the chaos, Richard and Faye stood together, overlooking the transformed space that had once been a sterile conference hall. The air hummed with the potential of a new era of galactic cooperation. "What have we done, Richard?" Faye asked, her voice filled with wonder and a hint of trepidation. Richard squeezed her hand, his eyes fixed on the vibrant alien landscape before them. "We've opened a door, Faye. To what exactly, I'm not sure. But whatever lies ahead, we'll face it together." As diplomats and scientists swarmed around them, eager for answers and access to their groundbreaking work, Richard and Faye knew that their journey was a long way to go. The task of guiding this new era of galactic cooperation loomed before them, filled with both promise and peril. Peril. The transformation of Station Zeta-9 marked only the beginning of a new era in galactic cooperation and scientific advancement. In the days that followed, as the station buzzed with activity and debates raged on, a proposal emerged from the newly formed Galactic Council. The council, comprising representatives from various species affected by the transformation, put forward an ambitious plan: the creation of a specialized research facility dedicated to studying and developing the botanical abilities that had emerged. When the council unanimously chose Richard and Faye to lead this groundbreaking project, they exchanged a look of surprise and purpose. The weight of responsibility settled on their shoulders, but the excitement of scientific discovery burned bright in their eyes. "Gaia Nexus," Richard mused, testing the name on his tongue as they stood before a holographic projection of the proposed facility. "It's fitting." Faye nodded, her newly acquired plant-like appendages swaying gently. "A nexus of life, science, and cooperation. It's everything we've worked for." The chosen site for Gaia Nexus was a previously uninhabited planet with diverse ecosystems, perfect for their research needs. As construction began, transformed delegates from various species volunteered to participate, forming a unique community of plant-humanoid hybrids. Richard and Faye found themselves at the heart of this new interstellar initiative, overseeing the development of sustainable living quarters that integrated seamlessly with the planet's natural environment. They worked tirelessly, their shared passion for science and discovery drawing them closer with each passing day. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the partially constructed facility, Richard turned to Faye. The setting sun cast a warm glow on her transformed features, highlighting the delicate patterns on her skin. "Faye," he said softly, "I never imagined we'd end up here when we first started working together." She smiled, her eyes reflecting the golden light. "Neither did I, but I wouldn't change it for anything." As they leaned in closer, a chime from Richard's communicator interrupted the moment. It was a message from the Romulan High Council. "They're increasing their support," Richard said, scanning the message. "They're sending additional scientists and resources, including a team led by Dr. Vex." Faye's expression brightened. "That's excellent news. Dr. Vex's insights from Viridia Prime will be invaluable." As Gaia Nexus neared completion, an unexpected problem arose. The rapid terraforming abilities of the transformed individuals began to affect the planet's climate on a global scale. Storms increased in frequency and intensity, threatening the safety of the research team and the stability of the facility. Richard and Faye found themselves working around the clock, analyzing data and running simulations to find a solution. The pressure mounted as they raced against time to stabilize the planet's ecosystem while preserving the unique abilities of the transformed individuals. During a particularly intense brainstorming session, alarms blared throughout the facility. Richard and Faye rushed to the control center, where they found Dr. Vex hunched over a console, his face etched with concern. "The storm systems are converging," he reported, pointing to a swirling mass on the holographic display. "If we don't act soon, the facility will be torn apart." As they debated their options, a ship entered the planet's atmosphere, cutting through the turbulent weather patterns. Commander Thorne's voice crackled over the comm system. "Dr. Shaw, we've got a delegation from Earth requesting permission to land. They say they're here to study the transformations." Richard's brow furrowed. "Earth? We weren't expecting—" "Wait, who's leading the delegation?" There was a pause before Thorne replied. "A Dr. Sarah Chen. She says she knows you." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. Faye noticed his reaction and placed a comforting hand on his arm. "Richard? Who is she?" He swallowed hard before answering. She's my ex-fiancée, and one of the most brilliant geneticists I've ever known." As the Earthship prepared to dock, Richard and Faye exchanged a look of understanding. The arrival of Sarah Chen added a new layer of complexity to their already challenging situation. They would need to navigate not only the scientific and diplomatic hurdles before them, but also the personal ones. The doors to the control center slid open, revealing Sarah Chen flanked by a team of human scientists. Her eyes locked onto Richard, a mix of emotions playing across her face. "Hello, Richard," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "It's been a long time." Before Richard could respond, another alarm blared. The holographic display flickered, showing a massive storm cell forming directly above the facility. "We need to act now," Faye said urgently, her plant-like appendages overflowing with energy. As the crisis escalated, Richard found himself caught between the immediate threat to Gaia Nexus, the complex emotions stirred by Sarah's arrival, and the deepening bond he shared with Faye. The fate of their groundbreaking work hung in the balance, and the next few hours would prove critical in shaping the future of not just their research, but potentially the entire galaxy. Faye closed her eyes, concentrating on her connection to the planet's flora. Around the facility, protective vegetation began to grow at an astonishing rate, forming a living shield against the intensifying storm. The gathered scientists watched in awe as Faye's abilities manifested on a scale they had never before witnessed. As the facility trembled under the onslaught of the storm, Richard knew they were facing a pivotal moment. With Sarah's unexpected arrival, the threat to their work, and the full potential of the transformations becoming apparent, The true challenges of Gaia Nexus were only just beginning to unfold. The chaos of the storm outside mirrored the tension within the control center as Richard, Faye, and the newly arrived Dr. Sarah Chen faced the immediate threat to Gaia Nexus. "We need to stabilize the weather patterns," Richard said, his voice steady despite the tumultuous emotions churning inside him. "Faye, can you use your connection to the planet's flora to help dissipate the storm?" Faye nodded, her eyes closing in concentration. The plant-like appendages on her body began to pulse with energy, and outside, the vegetation surrounding the facility started to grow at an accelerated rate. Massive trees shot up from the ground, their canopies spreading wide to form a natural barrier against the wind and rain. Sarah watched in amazement, her scientific curiosity overriding any personal feelings she might have had. "Incredible," she murmured, stepping closer to the holographic display. "The plants are actually altering the atmospheric conditions." As Faye worked to calm the storm, Richard and Dr. Vex focused on reinforcing the facility's structural integrity. They rerouted power to the shield generators, creating a dome of energy that worked in tandem with Faye's organic defenses. Hours passed in a blur of activity. The combined efforts of the transformed individuals and the advanced technology of Gaia Nexus gradually began to turn the tide. The storm's fury lessened, its howling winds reduced to a manageable breeze. As the immediate danger passed, the full extent of the damage became apparent. Parts of the facility lay in ruins, with twisted metal and shattered glass scattered across the grounds. Yet, amidst the destruction, new life had taken root. The rapid growth induced by Faye had created a lush, protective canopy around the surviving structures. In the weeks that followed, Richard and Faye threw themselves into the reconstruction efforts. They worked tirelessly, using their unique abilities to blend technology with nature in ways never before seen. The damaged sections of Gaia Nexus were rebuilt using a combination of advanced materials and living, responsive plant matter. One evening, as the twin suns of the planet set, casting a warm glow over the partially rebuilt facility, Richard found Faye in a newly planted garden at the heart of the complex. She knelt among the alien flora, her hands gently coaxing a delicate, iridescent flower into bloom. Richard watched her for a moment, struck by the grace and beauty of her movements. In that instant, he knew with absolute certainty what he needed to do. "Faye," he called softly, approaching her. She looked up, a smile spreading across her face. "Richard, come see what I've discovered. This species seems to respond to emotional stimuli. It's fascinating." As he knelt beside her, Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, shimmering object. "I have a discovery of my own to share," he said, his voice filled with warmth and affection. Faye's eyes widened as Richard opened his hand to reveal a ring unlike any other. Its band was crafted from a rare, luminescent plant native to Viridia Prime, carefully cultivated and shaped into a perfect circle. At its center sat a small, pulsating pod that seemed to glow with an inner light. "Faye," Richard began, his heart racing, "our journey together has been extraordinary. From our first meeting in that botany lab to everything we've faced here at Gaia Nexus, you've been my partner, my inspiration, and my strength. I've come to realize that I want to spend the rest of my life exploring the universe with you, by my side." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me?" Faye's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Richard, I will marry you." As Richard slipped the ring onto her finger, Faye's body unconsciously released a burst of sweet-scented pollen. The surrounding plants reacted instantly, bursting into bloom in a spectacular display of color and life. The newly engaged couple embraced, their forms silhouetted against the backdrop of the flourishing garden. As they held each other, both Richard and Faye knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one filled with promise, challenge, and the endless possibilities that came from their unique union. News of their engagement spread quickly through Gaia Nexus and beyond. Messages of congratulation poured in from across the galaxy, including a surprisingly warm note from the Romulan High Council. The Galactic Council, recognizing the symbolic importance of their union, officially endorsed the engagement as a shining example of interspecies cooperation. As Richard and Faye began to plan their wedding, they found themselves at the center of a growing movement. Their relationship had become a beacon of hope for interspecies couples throughout the galaxy, challenging long-held prejudices and opening new avenues for understanding between diverse cultures. One morning, as they worked together in one of Gaia Nexus's advanced laboratories, Richard made a startling discovery. He called Faye over to his workstation, his eyes alight with excitement. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a complex series of molecular diagrams on his screen. "I think I've found a way to induce a temporary controlled transformation in non-transformed individuals." Faye leaned in, her scientific mind quickly grasping the implications of Richard's findings. "This could change everything," she breathed. "Imagine being able to share our experiences, even for a short time, with others." As they delved deeper into this new line of research, Richard and Faye began to formulate a plan. They would use their wedding as a platform to showcase this groundbreaking discovery, offering attendees the chance to experience the world as transformed individuals for a brief time. The preparations for their wedding became intertwined with their scientific work, each aspect informing and enhancing the other. As the date drew near, Gaia Nexus buzzed with anticipation, not just for the union of two beloved researchers, but for the dawn of a new era in galactic understanding.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.